In this video, I'm going to emulate a demo painting by Rod Webb of Rod's Art. Rod has generously given me permission to do this. His video is available on YouTube with a link in the text accompanying this video. My intent here is to give a comparison between the physical and digital media, hopefully to show that it is possible to emulate traditional painting quite well using Photoshop. Rod's painting starts off with this image, and in his first video ends up with this image. In the first step, we're going to go not right to this last image here, but rather to this one here. So we have a normal background locked layer which contains a paper texture, a paper overlay layer that's all created automatically, and here is our watercolor layer within this painting group here. On the left hand side we have Rod's painting. On the right hand side we have a sketch and also Rod's initial painting. I've set up these layers here. First of all, the jug body here, the shadow area here, and then the top and bottom rims. And I'm going to paint these all separately because they are essentially separate components of the painting. I've created a mask for the jug body here and also for the shadow area. This really isn't, strictly speaking, necessary, as I mentioned to you before in the previous video, but because this is a very constrained, tight, precise area here, it does make it easier. But we could easily use a fairly precise brush and be careful about not going over the edges if we wished, instead of using a mask. At any rate, this is the layer that we're going to paint on here, this watercolor layer. I've also created a little mixer pad here with the various colors that we're going to be using in this painting. This is quite a good idea, I think, to do because it does save having to worry about getting the right colors as we're going along. What I've also done is to take a subset, these are the tool presets, a subset of the tools that I think I'm going to be using in this painting. As you can see, they're really very few compared to the large set that I've released here on this site. And essentially there are a few wash brushes, a rigger brush, and a couple of other brushes here, 3 smudges, a couple of erasers, and these brushes here I use simply to create the masks. This rust brush that I've got is actually a variation on the flat camel foreground background variation brush, and I'll explain that to you as we go along. To start off with, we're going to do some washes on the jug body, and to do that we're going to use the wash wet brush, we're going to use the smudge brush, and we may possibly use the eraser scatter brush. Now, simply by selecting these 3 brushes like that, I can now, by pressing the B, pick the wash wet. The S for smudge will give me the smudge brush that I picked. See if I click on this, same thing. And the E will give me the eraser scatter. So I can, to a large extent, forget about this tool selection box at this point. So I'm going to press the B and select the wash wet brush, and I'm going to press the Alt key and select the yellow here. Now, one of the most important things about these brushes is the opacity, and generally speaking, you should paint at a very low opacity for washes. So typically 20%, 10%, maybe not really going above 30%. A useful trick here to change the opacity, because this is something we need to do quite often, is to press the 1 key for 10%, the 2 for 20%. If you quickly press, let's say, 3 and then followed by the 4, you can get 34%, or 3 followed by the 5, 35%, 4 for 40%, 8 for 80%, and so on. So let's start off with an opacity of 20%. We have our yellow selected, and what we need to do then is to paint a gentle wash along here like that, and in yellow. And then if we pick the bluey grey, which is made of a mixture of French ultramarine and burnt umber, we're going to do something like this here, maybe a little bit darker over here, maybe a bit darker underneath here like that. As you can see, because this is quite a soft, wet brush, there's no great need to do any kind of blending or, let's say, adding of water, but we could pick a smudge tool and as you can see there, just essentially blend these two a bit together like that, and so we get a slightly more runny effect as we would like to get. We now want to put this bit of shadow area here, and we can do this a number of ways. First of all, we're going to need to change brushes, and let's pick, for example, the wet rigger, and perhaps we'll change to the smudge delicate. So just make sure that we have our brush selected. I press the B, and what we need to do, of course, is to pick our light grey color. And we need to dial down the opacity quite a lot, because otherwise we're going to get something like this. So let's say at 10%, and let's see what that looks like. So that's quite a light color, and what we could then do is do something like this, and then pick the smudge tool and then smudge it over like this. Another way to achieve this is, again, with the same brush selected, what we can do to simulate a wet effect is to increase the scattering quite considerably. So let's put it on both axes and also increase the count. So let's have a look and see what that gives us in terms of effect. See, there's a much wetter look here. So we could give our shadow area like this. In fact, I should have really put the opacity down lower and possibly made the brush bigger. So let's try that a little bit bigger like this, and put the opacity down to 5%. Let's see what we get. So we're getting a very, very wet, very gentle effect here, which I think is quite effective really. So there's very little need at this point to smudge this or wet it further, but if we wish to, of course we can just pick the smudge tool and just smudge it down a little bit like this. So here we are, pretty realistic effect compared to what Rod has on the left hand side, I think. Well, so far we've been painting on the just the one layer, and if we were to continue in the same vein as Rod has here when he adds rust to the jug body, we should really stay on this layer. However, I would prefer to go to a second layer, because it means that if we wish to make any modifications to the rust without modifying without affecting the underlying wash, we can do that, and we can always merge these two layers again and then allow the two to blend. So I'm going to add a new layer, and this is going to be the layer that we're going to paint the rust on, and possibly add some extra shadow areas in parts of the jug and some extra colors. So to do the rust, what we're going to do is use a different tool. We could continue to paint with the wet rigger. There's actually no problem doing that with a low opacity. Just simply pick the color you want, move it along here, and then use possibly the delicate smudge to let the paint flow. However, what I'm going to do is use this foreground background variation brush here, because I want this effect of dark going to light here, and whereas you can achieve this reasonably well in real paint by having a darker mix that then runs into the water and becomes diluted. You can't really do that with Photoshop, but you can use a kind of foreground background variation to achieve something very similar. But rather than use the brush as it stands, what I've done is made a small adjustment to it, and the first thing it does is to pick the colors. So I've already got the foreground and the background, the darker going to the lighter. It's set the opacity to 50%, which I think is about right for this, and that's about it really. So what this brush will look like is something like this. So it starts off dark and then goes to light. One thing we can do is to change the mode to multiply, and if we do that, what happens is that as we paint over it, it gets darker. As you can see, it will get darker anyway, but this is kind of essentially equivalent to painting on separate layers set to multiply, but doing it on a stroke by stroke basis. So this is an option that we have if we want to get a little bit more darkness within the rust areas. So let's put a bit of rust along the edges here and see how we get on. So darker at the top and then down to kind of a lighter color. About there maybe. And then a little bit over here. I'm just looking to see what, more or less copying what Rod has done here. Something similar anyway. And a little bit like that. A bit like this. Now we just need to pick the smudge tool and just delicately allow the water to the paint to flow. Just like that. Now if we wanted to paint larger areas of rust like this that have flowed down, we can either pick a different brush, or we can use this brush perfectly well. What we'd have to do is drop the opacity to about 10% and maybe increase the size a little bit, and then we can simply paint over it like that. Because it's a background foreground variation brush, I'm trying to talk and paint at the same time here. It's a little bit difficult for me. It starts off dark and goes light, but if you keep painting without lifting the brush, but even if you do, because the opacity is so low, it won't really matter. As you can see here, you get a small amount of dark followed by light, but if you keep painting, you're going to get all the lighter color, or the background color rather. So we can do this sort of thing here. Again, pick the smudge tool, maybe make it a little bit bigger this time to kind of do a bit more smudging, This is really, as I said, like adding water or um, letting the paint flow, so we can get this sort of effect. If we want to increase that, we can go back to the brush again. Ideally, we shouldn't really paint on the same layer. We could, in this case, let's say go to multiply mode to kind of shortcut things a little bit, which is kind of an alternative we can use, and then smudge this again a bit. Now that's not very good, but you get the general idea. If we find that we've gone over a bit too much paint in some places, we can do the equivalent of taking a dryish brush and lifting the paint off by picking an eraser like this cat eraser, probably putting the opacity quite low to maybe 20% or so, and then just gently like that. You see the effect is very, very subtle, and we're just touching it here and getting some of the paint to lift off. Maybe a little bit over here like that. So by doing that we can get quite a realistic effect. Now what I can see here is we've got some darker bits of paint around here, and what Rod did was he added these afterwards, so we can do exactly the same thing. We'll pick our rigger brush, which is quite good for this, and let's put the opacity quite low to something like 30%, and we can use the foreground color, which is already there, which is fine. So that means going quite delicately along here like this, and adding a bit of darkness as we go along. Maybe a bit more down here, for example, like this, and a little bit along here, and maybe along here like that. Like this. Okay, and then let's pick the smudge tool, bring the opacity down to something very low, like 20%, and quite small, and just soften this. Opacity is a bit low, maybe I'll bring it back up to 30%. That's better. Like that. So this is something that does require a little bit of time and observation and care, which I can't really put it into it at the moment. But you get the sense, I think, that this is beginning to look somewhat similar to this. Of course, it's not going to be quite the same, but close enough anyway. So what I'll do now is I'll do exactly the same thing, add some rust here and underneath here and along this edge here, still sticking to the jug body. And rather than sort of waste your time doing this, I'll go offline and get back once I've done that. I'm simply going to do exactly the same thing that I did here and do nothing more than that, and then we'll pick it up from there. So we've now got something beginning to approach a little bit what Rod has on this side here. I think the main thing is that even though it's not exactly the same, obviously, it does have quite a nice watercolor look to it, I think. So let's have a look at some of these little spots that he's got here. And what we can do for this is to use exactly the same brush that we had before, the rust brush. And one thing that I didn't mention is that by simply changing the foreground background color, and you can do that by pressing the X key, if we paint like that, we get the background color. If we change it again, get the background color. Small amounts, we get the foreground color. Change it, small amounts, the foreground color. So that allows us to use the same brush by simply varying the opacity a little bit and the size to get all of this kind of stuff. Of course, we can also do it using, for example, the rigger brush to do these spots, and then a wash brush to do these, but why not use the same brush? So first of all, I'm just going to get rid of that. Let's okay, the background color is set to the dark color, which is what we want. Let's make the brush a little bit smaller, maybe about this size, and let's set the opacity to about 38%, and let's see what we get. Well, that's not bad, and of course we can go over it more than once to not wonderful, but it's okay. And so let's change then to the change the background and foreground colors, change the opacity to maybe 10%, make the brush a bit bigger, and let's get some of the rust surrounding it like this. Okay, and now let's pick a smudge brush and bring the opacity down very low, size it a bit bigger, and just gently soften that and soften the area here. If we want to leave a hard edge, which is nice, sometimes watercolors we can do that simply by not smudging. So there we are, and we can modify that as we wish, add some more darkness perhaps, maybe change the shape a little bit. One thing you could do here, for example, if you wanted to change the shape of this darker spot without painting, you could get one of the drag smudge tools and just put it down like that, and you could do it that way. Now, one thing I'm looking at here, we've got a little bit. It'd be nice to remove. There's a little bit too much rust here. It doesn't make a lot of sense the way it's kind of gone here. So, if we just pick our eraser tool, and we can just lift the paint off a little bit like this. So, maybe something like that. Now we need to put a few little spots around here, maybe clean up a little bit here and so on. So just for a bit of variation, let's pick the wet rigger, and let's get the foreground color first, and maybe put a little bit of a mark around here like this. At this point, this one here is back to its normal unscattered form, because every time you select the brush again, you get the original back. That's why you need to save the preset if you want it with certain features like scattering increased. Then you save it as a new preset. So anyway, we don't worry about that too much at the moment. Let's put a little bit here. Okay, let's put a change to the foreground, change to the darker color for the foreground, and put a little spot here, a little spot here, a little bit more over here. It's a little bit darker. A little bit of darkness around here, maybe something like that. Okay. Right. Anyway, so now that we've done that, we need to soften it. So we just smudge it a bit. The usual process. There's that a bit delicately, like that, and so on. Okay. Well, at this point we're not a million miles away. Obviously, we need to still do the rims and then adjust things a little bit around there. But looking at this, clearly he's added some additional darkness around here and a bit of additional color here. So to do that, let's pick our wash wet brush, and I think I'll dial down the opacity to maybe 20%. Pick maybe a slightly lighter gray, and put a bit of darkness here like that. A little bit maybe here, and a little bit here. I'm just trying to see what he's done. It's a bit hard to see. Something like this. And now let's pick the yellow and put a bit more around here, and maybe a little bit smaller, a bit along the rim like this perhaps. Sometimes it's quite good to have a little bit of color like this in different places. It gives a nice look. So actually I might give a little bit more here like that. Okay. Well, what we could now do is maybe add a bit more color around here, perhaps a little bit around here, and for that the best thing would be to pick our wet wash, or in fact we could pick the wash with clean edge if we wanted. Let's do that for a change. And let's just have a look. Yeah, that's not too bad, but I think we want a kind of a more orangey color. Let's have a look at this. It's not bad, and let's try that. See that this brush gives you kind of a clean edge, which really in a way I don't think we want here. So I'm just going to get rid of that and go back to the wet brush, which I think is probably better. And let's bring the opacity down quite a lot to maybe 20% or so. And let's try that. That gives a gentler sort of effect. Let's give a bit more here. Like this. What we're doing here is building up layer by layer, and that gives you the luminosity that is so lovely in watercolors. So we might just what we could perhaps try and do here is look at the drippy water, turn the opacity very low to maybe 10%, and run this a little bit like that here. And what that'll do is the running water sort of does exactly what it says. It makes the paint kind of run, and if you put it too high in opacity, then it moves it a lot. So that's why I want something quite subtle here. What I could also do is maybe remove a little bit using the eraser just here. This is all very kind of delicate, subtle stuff, which, you know, I'll put it maybe back to the brush again, a bit more here like that. So, okay. Now, what I've been doing here is to build up the painting using layers, partly to give the luminosity that I was looking for, but also partly in case I make an error and I can just undo something and do it again, or if I find that this is too strong, I can dial down the opacity a little bit like that, for example. In fact, that doesn't look too bad. So this is at this point it would be a good idea really to start to adjust the layers to get the kind of effect that you want. But once you've done that, then there's no real value in keeping the layers like this, so we can collapse them, and I'm just pressing my Wacom button to bring them down to one layer. So here we are, on and off. Well, now that we've done that down to one layer, we might wish to make some little adjustments. So for example, I could pick the eraser tool and give a bit of lightness here, perhaps where there's kind of a reflection of the jug. It seems a bit flat here, so maybe remove a little bit over here. and so on, So it's a bit too much. So let's bring the opacity down to about 10%. Maybe do something like this. So we've got like little adjustments that kind of make sense to us, I guess. Something like this. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but that's kind of the general idea. And then, of course, if you want to build up more color, might take a little bit of yellow off here. Then we can add a new layer and add more paint. Smudge this a little bit. Looks like that. So there's more of an idea of shadow over here, like that. There's an idea of shadow over here now, I think. Okay, so we'll leave it at that at this point, and then now let's do the rims. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to collapse the jug body. I don't want to do any more with it just now, and for safety I'm going to lock it, and I'm going to do the top rim first. So I select the top rim and I'm going to unlock it because I now want to paint it, and I can get rid of the layer group at this point. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the R, which allows me to rotate the canvas, press the space key, which allows me to bring it down. And the reason I'm doing that is because really I find it easy to paint like this, something delicate, than do it horizontally. So it's just a question of preference. So let's pick the pencil dry wax, and the reason picking that is that it has this kind of rough look, and we want the rim to be rather rusty and rough looking. This Rod's jug was rusty and rough looking, and let's do something here where we'll put in the color dynamics and put quite a lot of jitter between the foreground and the background. So we've got the foreground is that color and the background is that color, and that gives us this kind of variation. Maybe it's a little bit too much, but that's not too bad, I think. So let's get rid of that, and let's see if we can get this done. Okay. So this angle is really quite easy to paint. The rim is a little bit thicker here, I think. Let's make it a bit wider. We want to go a little bit over the, like that, I think. Okay, so let's do the back. It's going to go over this. Just by pressing a little bit harder I can get a darker color. Maybe a bit over here. Something like that. And a bit more here. Let's go over this here a bit. Now we've got different colors here, but that's what Rod had initially, so kind of stuck with it. What we might do is to add a bit of darker color along here too in a little while. So what do we think of that? Well, it's okay. So let's do the bottom rim, and to do that what we need to do is to select the bottom rim and unlock it, and let's go over this. I'm just saying with a bit more pressure this time, which makes it a bit darker and a bit bigger too. And carefully around here. And here. course, the wonderful thing with digital is that if you make a mistake, you can just undo it, or you can erase it. Anyway, I'm not going to be too careful because obviously this is a kind of a bit of a rough jug. Don't know where Rod got it from, but it's seen better days, I think. Okay, so we leave it like that for now, and we're going to turn it around to see what it looks like in at print size compared to Rod. Well, okay, I mean, it's not bad. Clearly what we've got here is a much sharper, it's a little bit, in comparison to the rest of the jug, it's clearly a bit too hard. So what we need to do is soften it a bit. So let's pick our delicate smudge, and let's bring the opacity down to something very low. Might try 20% first, and bring the brush, make the brush quite small because we just want to affect this bit here. So that's very gently. I mean, we do want to leave a bit of roughness there. It does seem like we could have made it a little bit wider, perhaps. I think I might increase the opacity maybe to 30%. It seems a bit weak. Make it a bit bigger and see what we're doing. Look down here. Okay, so we need to darken there a little bit. There's kind of a white rim there which doesn't seem quite right. So I'm going to go back to our pencil dry wax, and the colors okay there, I think. Let's put a bit of darkness down over here like that. I seem to be able to manage to paint in this direction now somehow. Take the smudge it a little bit, not too much, maybe like that. I think perhaps a little bit of, not doing this very well, a bit of darkening maybe the back here like this, and back here maybe. Let's have a look at the bottom. Bottom's not so bad. I just a little bit of darkness like that too, like that. Give it a bit more definition. So you can look at a bit of roughness here maybe. Just for the hell of it. It's going to be more like Rod's jug every minute. Right, and let's bring it back down to size. Let's see. Well, it's not too bad actually. Now, one thing we need to do is to give it a little bit of darkness underneath the jug. First of all, it will give it definition, and of course, there will be some darker colors underneath here. So for this, what we'll do is we'll pick the wet trigger because we want it to be quite delicate, and I'm going to pick this is a kind of a blacky, dark, very dark blue color, as you can see over here. That's a mixture of French ultramarine, crimson alizarin, and cadmium yellow pale, which is quite a nice way of getting a good dark blue color. Of course, you could use the color picker if you wished instead, but this is kind of a more traditional way of doing it, I guess. So what I'm going to do is turn our friend around again because it's kind of an awkward way to paint otherwise. Back to the brush. And we just put a little bit of color underneath like this, a bit darker in some spots, not so much in others. Just like that. Maybe a little bit here. Same reason. So I do is put a little bit here, dial down the opacity to maybe 20%, put a little bit of color here, darken it a little bit. Don't want to remove too much of the roughness because it is a very rough. Oh, I'm making a mess here, so get rid of that. Okay, increase the bit like that maybe. Okay, so I think that's okay. It's enough. It's enough for the moment. So if we look at if we can compare these two, I mean there are differences, but I wouldn't say that one is necessarily better than the other. Clearly one thing here is that we've got quite a lot more sharpness on this side than we do on this side, and that is partly because this image was taken from a very low resolution video, so there's kind of a fuzziness there that wouldn't have been in Rod's original um, image. So we could do plenty more, but I think what we can do, rather than sort of add and modify, and I can see that around here we might do some work, would be to move on to the next step of Rod's painting. Because this video has got quite long due to all of my yattering, and I'm going to stop now and do the next steps in the next video.